The first concepts we have to understand are sexual ideals and sexual mirrors, right? The idea is you have you, right? You, right here. No, you right there. And you have your sexual ideal, right? What you want. That's what it is, right? Now, your ideal matches you, right? The reason you have your ideal is because you are who you are. So for every person, you know, they have a matching ideal, right? And an ideal comes from them, not the other way around. You don't fit your ideal fits you perfectly, right? It's very simple. You have your ideal, and that's that. So this ties into the next concept, right? It's your sexual response curve, right? Basically, the more similar a stimulant is to your ideal, the bigger the impulse you get from it sexually, you know? Now your ideal itself doesn't exist, right? But there are various things that come close to it. Now this is a very natural response, right? These impulses. It's similar to hunger, right? Your sexual response to, you know, a brick is about the same as you are hungry for a brick, right? It's very, very low on the list, you know, very low on the list, right there. But you know that one woman you saw one time when you were barely awake at the airport, that's like those juiciest double cheeseburgers you see on those TikTok videos, you know? That's very high up there, you know? Right? Now there's an important thing you need to notice, is that the impulse overall is quite weak, right? You can draw a line. You can draw a line where you will not override, your impulse will not override your your basic emotions and your basic needs, your basic drive to conserve energy and not waste your time, right? We don't bother thinking sexually about all the things around us because they're in the bottom 99%, right? But if you look at the top, all the way to the top, only at the top, right? All the way to the top, and you draw a little graph there, you see that the curve is kind of like this, right? It's very steep. And even at the top, all the competition is always about the top, right? It's all about the top because at the top, the curve is exponential generally. So at the top, the competition is the biggest, right? You know, if let's say you're a woman and you're attracted to men, sometimes when you see a woman, women and men are, generally speaking, all things considered, very similar, right? So you can feel some sexual response to that, but usually they're just weaker, you know, they are less frequent and they just last shorter. They're just not as reliably, they're not reliably as stimulants, right? Because they're not that close to your ideal. It's always about the top. And even at the top, the impulse isn't that strong, right? You can generally exert control over your actions. It just comes to a boiling point at a certain point. Again, very similar to hunger, right? If you don't eat for long enough, you get hungry. Now, there are different types of curves you can have. The more you stray from the norm, the more these curves take on different shapes, right? You can have a curve like this, let's say, where they kind of have a bigger spot at the top, a little bit more area, so the overall impulse these people can get are a bit higher, but they're not that similar. The majority of people have a curve that's somewhat exponential, right? They're actually fairly restrictive, and the impulse tends to be very weak, all things considered. Okay, the next point is very, very important. It's sexual binormalcy versus abnormalcy, right? What you can see here is a visual representation. In reality, this is much more complex, but it's a polydimensional bell curve, right? I just represented it with this image. But think about this, a polydimensional bell curve. In the center, the main curve, the majority of the people are. It's a norm, right? And it's the reason I call this binormalcy is because there's two ways to be normal and various divergent ways to be abnormal, right? That's when you're normal, you're a man or a woman, right? At the top of the curve, all the way at the top of the curve, you get what I call, right, the normal man and the normal women, and they are attracted to each other, right? So the normal man's ideal is the normal woman, and vice versa, right? Back and forth. That's how it goes. And when you're at the top, you tend to be attracted to other people at the top. That's how that goes, right? And we all know this, but the majority of people are in this bell shape in the center, but there are spots on the sides that do cluster together and do form little groups, little pockets, even though they tend to be much smaller number and especially way less stable, because the response curves, sexual response curves of these people in these groups tend to be more divergent. So when you have a more divergent sexual response curve, you respond to more different things from your ideal more, so you tend to fit in groups less. Right? It's just very difficult to generalize about the outlying groups, about the abnormals, right? Now, what does this mean for us, right? What does this say about, or what does this mean for us? Personally, when you have an understanding of what your ideal is and how your response curve looks, this can greatly help you find love, right? But I can't really say anything about how that looks, because that's all only dependent on you. It's all dependent on you, because the curve is you. It's part of you. And the ideal is you. Well, it's not exactly you, but it's matched to you, right? The ideal is always tied to you first, rather than the other way around. But again, I can't really say anything about this. But what I can say, though, more importantly, is how sexuality ties into ethics and how we build a society around us, right? Just think, what is a society? What is this? It's made by the people, for the people, but the people are, say it with me, they're normal, right? So any stable society is always structured, at least when it comes to sexual ethics, around the binormal curve, right? The binormal curve dictates what society is stable. Any society that is stable has to incorporate that core fundamental in their society, right? Now, why this is important is because you want to structure your society ethically to have a reliable, structured, and proper ethical code, right? But you also don't want to exclude abnormal groups, which tends to happen when you start making regulations, right? Because we want to regulate, because we want to secure a stable future and protect the social order. But when you exclude certain groups because of that, what happens is they get alienated, and when they get alienated, they become antisocial, and antisocial people, they disrupt the society. And even the smallest amount of these people can be catastrophic. So we want to include them, but stay ethical at the same time. Now, how do we do that? How do we do that? Right. The answer is you're strict, right? Because when you're strict, really strict, what happens is you are ethical because you exclude all degeneracy that exists out there, and you make the abnormal groups feel like they are a part of the norm, because they are all sexually frustrated. When only the abnormals are sexually frustrated, they become violent. But when the norm is sexually frustrated, all the sexual frustration boils up from the norm, right? So you structure the society around it, right? So you still have that core fundamental, and the abnormal normal pockets feel included, and it's ethical because you restrict degeneracy, you protect the social order, and you protect your future as a society, right? So you need to be strict, right? Very important. This is what they call me the second coming of Socrates, okay? These are terms you've never heard of, right? Now, I don't like to brag or anything, but man, am I a genius, right? No one's going to tell you about this because they don't want you to know, right? All the talks about sexual things nowadays, they're there to confuse you. And this theory makes it all fit together, right? You know about ideals, sexual ideals. You know about sexual impulses and response curves and how this affects you. You know how sexuality expresses itself among individual people and how people fit in the greater whole now, right? Because they fit on the plane, right? They need to be in the sea or in the curve. All right. Hey, see you, man. Have a nice day. You know I'm right. Come on now. And next is the goat. Hey.